This is Fortress on a Hill with Henry, Danny, Kagan, Jovanni, Shiloh, Manisha, and Mike.
Welcome, everyone. Fortress on the Hill, podcast about U.S. foreign policy, anti-imperialism, skepticism, and the American way of work. I'm Jovanni, your host. Thank you for being with us today. I'm joined by our friend of the show, Jake Tucker. He'll be coming in soon. He hasn't jumped in yet, but once he comes in, and we'll continue, we'll go with the discussion. So in today's episode, we're diving into the state of global affairs in the era defined by the decline of American global hegemony, the unraveling of late-stage capitalism. What does this moment mean for the world? And how is the American empire adapting or failing to adapt to its diminishing power? The United States, once the unchallenged hegemon of the unipolar world, is watching its dominance erode. Its ruling elites, once seen as the architect of global empire, are now mired in incompetence, infighting, and growing inability to manage both their domestic politics and the crumbling international order. The cracks in American hegemony are widening. The rise of China is steadily supplanting U.S. economic power, while the resurgence of Russia after 17 years of post-Soviet malaise has reemerged as the formidable challenger to the American-led Western empire. Today, these powers are upending the design of global supremacy that the U.S. has forced for decades. After 3 decades of unipolarity, the world is now hurtling towards multipolarity, or as the late Venezuela revolutionary leader Hugo Chavez once envisioned, pluripolarity, a world without centers of power where true equity among nations becomes the ideal. But as the U.S. loses ground in Eastern Europe, Central Asia, West Asia, and on the economic front with East Asia, it's shedding its veneer of stability and rule of law, resorting to outright strong arming and the projection of raw power to preserve its dominance, or at least delay its inevitable decline. Nowhere is this more evident than the West's active support of genocide in Palestine, a stark betrayal of the very concepts of international law they created after the Second World War. The same powers that purported to uphold these laws and hold others accountable have turned them upside down, dismissing them altogether to protect the genocidal enclave in West Asia. This hypocrisy has laid bare the moral bankruptcy of large late-stage capitalism and the Western imperial project. In this era of decline, the U.S. is turning its focus inward, reducing the standard of living of its citizens and cannibalizing its closest allies in Western Europe, while shifting its attention to its near periphery in the Americas. The anxiety among American imperialists, neoconservatives, and neoliberals is palpable as they confront a world where their power is no longer guaranteed. As American power wanes, we ask, what does the future hold? Is polarity the goal, or are we heading towards global disorder? Here to help us make sense of all this is Professor Danny Shaw. Professor Shaw has taught international affairs, Latin American, and Caribbean studies at the City University of New York for 2 decades. He was recently dismissed as a professor at John Jay College in New York City for speaking out against the genocide in Palestine. Shaw has been in the U.S. revolutionary movement since 1994 and is the author of Despise, the Poor White Trash Manifesto. Shaw is a frequent commentator at Telesur, Russia Today, Hispan TV, and other international channels. He is an ethnographer and is fluent in Haitian Creole, Spanish, Portuguese, and Indian. He has visited and organized in 86 different countries. Professor Shaw, it's an honor to have you here today. How are you doing today?
Yeah, good to see you, Giovanni and Jake. An honor to be here. Very important moment for anti-imperialists across the world.
Indeed. So, Professor Shaw, again, we're honored to have you here. Thank you for coming and sharing your time with us and giving us your thoughts. I want to ask you to tell us a little bit about your work.
Where to begin? I just finished the Despised, the Poor White Trash Manifesto. I definitely came from the bottom in Brockton, Massachusetts, and then in the Bronx, New York. So for me, the struggle, the class struggle, the anti-imperialist struggle was always very personal, seeing my own family members and the overdoses, the unemployment, the generational trauma, the abuse, the addiction, the deaths of despair. And then, of course, the other side of all that, which is recovery and fighting back. And from a very young age, I really, thanks to my mom, I saw that what was happening to the Haitian people, what was happening to the Palestinian people, I felt the Haitian or a Palestinian anti-imperialist flame within, seeing everything that was happening to myself and my nuclear family and extended family. In 1995, the anti-imperialist movement sent me as a youth representative. I was 16 years old to Havana, Cuba for the International Youth Festival. I met young revolutionaries from around the world. I committed myself to learning true Spanish, not just like the freshman year of high school when you have to take Spanish and you learn a few words. And yeah, I've dedicated my life to internationalism, enjoyed every second of it. When you stand up for the truth, you do accumulate a number of enemies, that's for sure. But to remember what Mao Zedong said, it's good to have enemies. It shows the quality of our work. I lived in Haiti, lived in the Dominican Republic, lived in Brazil, lived in Western Africa and Cape Verde, and learning the languages of the people was key for me to be able to break down what they were living through. So I think for me, I just wish I had more lives to give to the struggle, to keep learning different languages and to be on the ground, just hearing from all of the heroic people from Puerto Rico to Bolivia, from Chile to the Dominican Republic.
You have a long, extensive resume there. You lived a lot. And indeed. So Argentine leader Juan Perón once said, "The true politics is international. The rest is administration." How do you see the current state of American empire reflecting in the contradictions of late-stage capitalism, particularly in terms of economic decline, domestic polarization, reduction in standard of living, and inability to sustain global hegemony?
There's so much focus within the empire on scapegoating immigrants. I spent a lot of the last year actually applying all the ethnography to Ohio and Indiana and Southern Illinois. I was out there in Trump country and in the Midwest just trying to understand how Fox News and the xenophobic oligarchs were miseducating and indoctrinating everyday working class people. And I heard so many on so many different occasions, just very dehumanizing things from everyday Americans, respectful Americans, working class Americans, humble Americans. But when it came to questions of immigration and questions of race, you could hear in their voices the scapegoating and the anti-immigrant racist hysteria. But what every American has to understand is that if your homeland, Chile, Argentina, Brazil, these are some of the richest areas of the entire world. Venezuela has more oil deposits than anywhere else. And every economist estimates, they don't know if it'll be in 2060, 2065, but the oil resources are going to run out. So the empire is desperate for the oil, and the number one producer that produces that has more oil, even not the number one producer, but the number one holder of the most oil and natural energy reserves in the world is Venezuela, even more than Saudi Arabia. So right now, the ruling class, and there's different debates within the foreign policy establishment. Biden, it's not a Biden Trump debate beef. They're just mouthpieces of the different oligarchs, of the, whether it's the energy sector or the military industrial complex, the pharmaceutical lobby, the Zionism. These are the big powers disputing what's most favorable for the different oligarchs. So certainly Biden represented one strategy, and now Trump is on the scene. I think a big part of the foreign policy establishment is very afraid of Trump. The fact that Trump so quickly went after US AID. It is wrong to say US aid, very sinister, very cunning name because it has nothing to do with aid and everything to do with exploitation. But these imperialists never underestimate the enemy. But for Trump to gut US aid in his first 2 weeks in office, we're talking about a $44 billion budget, for example, roaming the countryside of Haiti, or being in the bidonvilles, the ghettos of Port-au-Prince, you would see little US aid projects all over. It would always masquerade as the benevolent Americans giving food to the poor Haitians and the poor Latin Americans and the poor Africans, but only 10% of USAID's budget actually ever reached anybody in Bangladesh or in the Ukraine. USAID is a central part of the imperial state. For example, in Ukraine, and this all came out publicly, the New York Times ran a story on it yesterday, and they were panicked because 90% of all media in Ukraine is funded by the empire, funded by US taxpayers. They're afraid of losing this proxy war against Russia with the Ukrainian people trapped in the US NATO meat grinder. So if Trump's going to dismantle the imperial state, what exactly does that mean? Is it, in fact, a dismantling of the imperial state? Will that $44 billion now go to the Midwest to create manufacturing jobs that left in the 70s and 80s? We don't trust Trump for a second. Trump is pure blah, blah, blah rhetoric. Where's that $44 billion going to go? Is it going to go to the Pentagon and the State Department so that they can more directly? Because USAID and Biden, Obama, they represented more of a soft imperialism, a more sophisticated neocolonialism, what Frantz Fanon would have called indirect colonialism, which is camouflaged, humanitarian rhetoric. We had to go into Libya. What they did in Syria was so necessary to save lives. And there's even evidence that the Israelis and the US experimented with a nuclear bomb in Syria. But all of the headlines, which are controlled by the military industrial complex, General Electric, for example, owned MSNBC and Univision, which was like the Spanish equivalent. So these are mouthpieces of militarism, and they have this high sounding rhetoric. Here comes Trump. Trump says, forget all the rhetoric. We want the oil of Venezuela. And we're going to, Marco Rubio, we're going to crush the enemies of humanity. We're going to crush Nicaragua. We're going to crush Cuba. We're going to crush Venezuela. So I don't know that we have had someone speak so directly about their intentions. Trump immediately re-implemented. Biden never stopped the blockade on Cuba, but he did a few symbolic measures to appear to be more conciliatory or diplomatic. It was complete BS. But here comes Trump and ratchets up the blockade against Cuba. The function of the blockade against Cuba and the blockade against Venezuela is to stoke hunger and dissent and migration, to make these different socialist projects look bad. These are very dire moments, specifically for the Cuban people. I just published a study at Gray Zone about the hunger inflicted by the US blockade. So I'll leave it there just to keep the conversation going.
Yeah, I understand the US idea. It's been a long time, a long tool of US imperial soft power and driving the cold revolution around the world, destabilizing government, pretty much trying to peel by these little NGOs that sets up, try to peel people away from their governments and whatnot, to create rift among them intentions. Why would you chop this? It seems to be an effective tool of imperial power. Why would you chop it? This has been this effective all these decades.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's too early to completely understand, but we know that a billionaire like Trump and the world's richest billionaire, Elon Musk, their intentions are not to reinvest that money out in San Antonio, Houston, and in the Bronx, New York. We know that's not true. So I think they're just trying to get rid of the middlemen. Historically, capitalism, by definition, politicians, the government is nothing more than the executive committee of the bourgeoisie, of the ruling class. Here comes Trump with all of his nepotism, narcissism, sadism. And Trump says, forget the middlemen. We don't need politicians. We, the billionaires, can rule directly. And that's why the liberal class is so disgruntled. They're not disgruntled for the same reason that class-conscious anti-imperialists like we are. They're disgruntled because US Aid had 17,000 employees, some of whom I went to graduate school with. And in our graduate schools, whether it was at Princeton or Harvard or wherever, the CIA came to recruit and USAID came to recruit. So you have these 17,000 bureaucrats, and here comes arrogant Trump, and this could be Trump's downfall. you can only step on so many ruling class toes. Like those assassination attempts against Trump did not come out of nowhere. And there is big reason to believe that if he continues to meddle, right now it's not clear because he said he was going to end the Russia Ukraine conflict, which is not a Russia Ukraine conflict. It's a US NATO offensive against Russian geopolitical, geomilitary, and geoeconomic interests. But that's not what they sell us, particularly the Russia phobic Russiagate liberal media. And I think liberal media really had hegemony. And here came Trump and the Trump phenomenon and Trump country, and they threw a giant monkey wrench into neoliberalism. So it appears that with Trump's arrogance, it remains to be seen. He just had an emissary in Venezuela meeting with Nicolas Maduro. What we know is that the ExxonMobil and these massive corporations want to tap into, and they are tapping into the Venezuelan resources. Venezuela is surrounded by U.S. military bases. Gustavo Petro, the president who's been in power now in Colombia for roughly about 2 years, a very valiant historical record, but he can't dismantle the 9 U.S. military bases in Colombia unless he wants to be assassinated yesterday. In Panama, they already have 11 U.S. military bases, so Venezuela is surrounded. The U.S. military is in the Caribbean Sea. They control 14% of all Puerto Rican land is in the U.S. military's hands. Now they've used Guyana under the Biden administration. There were all these Laura Richardson, the general, 5-star general, four-star or 5-star top CIA asset agent, meeting with the Guyanese, with President Ali, who's really just puppet Ali, to try to use this whole Essequibo region as an excuse to go into Venezuela. So maybe they're getting rid of U.S. aid so they can more directly just use what the former president of the Dominican Republic, who was overthrown in 1965, Juan Bosch, he called it pentagonismo, pentagonism. So Trump could be a more direct representative of the military industrial complex, or he could try to get along with the Venezuelan Bolivarian leadership for right now. I think a lot remains to be seen. Tomorrow will be 3 weeks that Trump's been back in power, but it's been a whirlwind 3 weeks. Who knows what he's going to do next?
Yeah, power, right? That's what they're going for. It seems like. Chomsky talked about that the United States empire has been in decline since the Vietnam War. I would say that since the Iraq invasion and since 9/11 Iraq's invasion and invasion of Afghanistan, this decline has just been rapidly been going faster and faster. We've been going from one leadership in this country goes from bad to worse to incompetent to buffoonery. And yeah, and I feel that the ruling class, the ruling power, the managers of empire have anxieties as they see that the power is waning around the world. Pepe Escobar writes this book called like Empire Chaos. And it seems like just by creating chaos around different parts of the globe is they intend to prolong American power, American hegemony around the world. What's your take on that?
Yeah, so many analysts say that we're witnessing the decay of empire, and I don't doubt it, but at the same time, we can't be overly cavalier. The everyday hunger that the Cuban people face because of U.S. foreign policy, 7.8 million Venezuelans have been forced to leave their homeland since the 2014 Obama era economic war against Venezuela. If we listen to Trump and Netanyahu's genocidal press conference last week, now they're talking about 1.7 million Gazans or Palestinians. What happened to the 2.4 million Palestinians? As the Lancet Medical Journal explained to us, they have been obliterated. They have been genocided. That's the definition of a genocide. The entire world has witnessed it. The Zionists, the Israelis openly brag about it. The decay of this empire could not come soon enough for us, both at home and abroad. The Pentagon's budget continues to approach or be in excess if you include the unvouchered, that is unaccounted for CIA budget. The CIA is an agency and Trump's meddling there as well. Let's not forget the CIA had public, as did the FBI, they've had public letters against Trump in the New York Times published as a centerfold. So the deep state, the state in general is in disarray. This is part of the crumbling of empire. But how can we really say the empire is crumbling to the Palestinian people? Let's talk about Haiti for a second, the Palestine of the Caribbean. I've been traveling to Haiti, speak Haitian Creole fluently since 1998. And for them to just get rid of US aid, it will impact many Haitian families who've been forced to depend on the crumbs of empire as they steal the minerals and the gold and the incredible natural resources and agriculture of Haiti and exploit these sweatshop workers. They then come in with these little crumbs, and it conjures up Malcolm X quote, "We don't want your crumbs. We want a bakery in which to make our own bread." So this is really a question of sovereignty. We saw the elections yesterday, the first round of elections in Ecuador. It's a showdown between Bolivarian forces, and that's why they're so afraid of Venezuela. Venezuela has been the spearhead of Bolivarianism. What is Bolivarianism? What was the vision of Simon Bolivar? Simon Bolivar at the end of his life, because Simon Bolivar was born into a lot of privilege and an aristocratic family. But by the end of his life, his vision was a united continental project against the encroaching US empire, which was on the rise back then, and of course, the dying European empires. So Hugo Chavez won the election in 1998. I was living in the Dominican Republic working with the Marxist, Leninist, the leftist forces down then. I remember when Chavez won, it was a lightning rod for across the continent for all leftists, for all anti-imperialists, and Nicolas Maduro and Jorge Arriaza and so many different leaders have continued that legacy, but they're up against this $1 trillion Pentagon budget. So in Ecuador, right now, really, it's Luisa Gonzalez representing the Rafael Correa, the anti-imperialist forces, the Bolivarian forces, though probably not quite as radical as the Venezuelans or the Cubans. Each country has its own national context. We can't oversimplify it. But certainly if Luisa Gonzalez wins on April 16th, when the presidential elections will be held, and she's up against who? Daniel Noboa, the son of the richest Ecuadorian billionaire. So the right-wing forces in Ecuador, and this is a microcosm for the forces that are in the showdown across the entire continent. If Daniel Noboa wins, he'll continue to invite the US military and Trump into the Galapagos Islands. Rafael Correa, when he won the presidency in 2006, his first order of business was he closed the US military base in Manta. And he had the famous quote where he said, if the US can occupy our country, then surely we can send thousands of Ecuadorian troops to occupy Miami, which of course no one would ever allow, because that is the hypocrisy and the double standard of imperialism. It's important to say that $1 trillion military budget, which we ourselves fund as taxpayers, I think most people in the US are very ignorant to it. Whether willfully or not, we could debate, but the United States continues to have 72 US military bases in Honduras, just in the Americas, just in South America and the Caribbean, with the biggest one being the Soto Air Force Base in Honduras. They had the coup against Pedro Castillo in December of 2022. It was just the second anniversary of that coup, where they have one of their other biggest naval bases. So it's a battle for hegemony. We no longer live in that unipolar world like we did post-Soviet Union and Warsaw Pact countries like East Germany and Poland. Now you have the rise of China, you have the rise of Russia, you have the Bolivarian countries, you have Iran, though I think, of course, with the recolonization of Syria, what they've done to Lebanon, 1/3 of all Lebanese people displaced. Iran is more isolated. So that's why Iran has more military and economic deals with the Russians, with the Chinese. You have the Shanghai organization. And that's the legacy of the Bolivarians. They started Telesur. What's Telesur? Why can't the South Americans, why can't the Caribbeans have their own CNN? Why do they have to watch the United States' CNN just in Spanish? Then you have Alba and you have CELAC. These are all these different continental projects of unity and integration. So we'll be looking very closely what happens in Ecuador. There's going to be elections in Bolivia coming up. We can talk about the whole spat between Evo Morales and Lucho Arce in Bolivia. Argentina is a bastion of reaction right now. Argentina has massive resources, but the Chinese economically are really winning the trade war in South America, which is a huge difference from the early 2000s.
Yeah, indeed. That was one of the reasons Marco Rubio did his trip in Latin America recently. He's trying to bully Panama, for example, to try to get Panama to cut any economic ties with China. And you mentioned the CELAC and ALBA. There's also other organizations that are forming, like the BRICS, the CAC, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which you mentioned, the Economic Cooperation Organization, the Alliance of Sahel States. With all these, and also you got the Project of China, which is the Belt Road Initiative, the BRIC. With all these movement going on around the globe that's happening outside the control of the West, which is something that Chavez was big on with regional integration and South relations. With all this going on, do you feel that this is contributing to the anxiety of Western powers? And if this is this shifting the balance of power in the post-colonial and post-Cold War world?
Oh, no question. No question. At the same time, if the world was truly multipolar or pluripolar, to quote Hugo Chavez, as you did, would there be a genocide? Would there be a Holocaust or another native people? What's the difference between 2025 and 1492? What's the real difference? The bombs are much more sophisticated but at the end of the day, the control of information, what is Twitter nowadays but the feudal kingdom of the world's richest billionaire? It's pathetic and it's not going to stop. They're going to continue to consolidate power, which will continue to bring up not just economic confrontations with China, but this is why they've had this whole proxy war on China by using a historical province of China, Taiwan, in Hong Kong, in Tibet, and the Uyghur people, as if the United States cared about democracy when they go around the US and you see these bumper stickers, not as much as you used to 20 years ago, but free Tibet, and all this attention on Hong Kong and how horrible the Chinese are. And it's open your eyes and look at US foreign policy. But of course, they're meddling there because how many, at this point, it's something like Pepe Escobar gives all the numbers. It's 140 different countries who've joined the Silk Road Initiative. That was one of the true legacies of Lula and Dilma Rousseff in Brazil, both of who were couped by U.S. proxy forces. These were judicial coups, or what we should study as lawfare. But one of the true legacies of the Workers' Party in Brazil, China replaced the United States as the leading trade partner of Brazil. So no longer do the South American countries have to submit to the Monroe Doctrine, which has been active for 201 years. Barack Obama actually apologized for it, which is pathetic as they continue to treat the Caribbean and South America as their backyard. Right now, they're sending whatever immigrants they can to Guantanamo Bay, which is what they did under Clinton in the early 1990s, putting the Haitian migrants and others into Guantanamo Bay. What do they have to have a base station parked in the middle of the Cuban people who had this incredible 1959 revolution? And this is the essence of the Sahel countries, Mali, Burkina Faso, in the spirit of Thomas Sankara, Africa's Ernesto Che Guevara, and in Guinea, and these countries that are standing up. They've kicked out the French ruling class economic interests and military interests. They're inspiring the entire world. Yeah, Panama. Imagine Marco Rubio going back to Panama and threatening them and saying that they're going to take back the canal. Panama was ripped out of the Gran Colombia. It was just a province that Theodore Roosevelt back in 1902, it was made in the United States. They created a country, just like they created this whole thing about Taiwan and Hong Kong and Tibet and the Uyghur people. Why can't the Chinese, why can't that area of the world celebrate their own diversity? So that is imperialism that comes with this humanitarian camouflage. American people, human beings want to see justice. And if they're told every day that the Chinese are doing this and the Russians are doing this and the poor Ukrainians and the poor Taiwanese and the poor Cubans, our electorate, our people, And that's why our people sign up for the US military. That's a piece of it, right? They've been brainwashed to think the United States is the greatest country in the world and want to go do this. And people join the military because they think they're going to be digging canals and they're going to be doing these humanitarian projects. They don't know that they're going to be participating in the recolonization of Afghanistan, of Iraq, of Libya, of Syria. Nowadays, really, the US military is contracting out a lot of their projects. What we just saw, what Trump is interrupting is one of the great experiments. Great is in massive, great is in good. But what Empire was doing in Haiti now, they were contracting proxy forces from Kenya, from the Bahamas, from Jamaica, from Guyana. They were paying mercenaries, no different than how during World War I and II, the French Empire and the British Empire would pay Indian soldiers and Senegalese soldiers to do their dirty work. But because these wars of expansion are so unpopular, the US has now been using foreign mercenaries instead of mercenaries right here at home because these wars are so unpopular. But
Nigerian soldiers too.
huh?
Nigerian soldiers, yeah.
Because of the dire situation, so many of our young people have to join the military because what's out here. So the economic trend, despite Trump's a pathological liar, Trump's going to bring back manufacturing jobs from 1977 to Cleveland, Ohio, and South Chicago and Gary, Indiana. He'll maybe indirectly they'll bring back a few through these tariffs and stuff, but the American people are going to wake up because within the next 6 months to a year to 2 years, never mind in 4 years when Trump's supposed to relinquish power, they're going to wake up that the future is automation and artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is out of control, but it displaces everyday workers. Long
Right.
gone are the manufacturing days when they can pay Indonesian workers and Vietnamese workers and Honduran workers a few dollars a day. Why are they going to employ us here in Hunts Point or Williamsburg for $20 an hour?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I appreciate this. So many threads to pull on here, but I wanted to go back to looking at Latin America, the focus on Latin America, and also with Rubio as Secretary of State. I really appreciated your article on Cuba because I was really thinking many of the same thoughts at the time that you published it. I went to Cuba in 2019 and then returned in 2023 and just saw the drastic differences just in that short 4-year time frame. Some of the people that I had met there in 2019 were noticeably thinner. Some of the buildings noticeably in a more deteriorated state. And then with the naming of Rubio as Secretary of State, I'm just wondering what, with his just dogged obsession with Cuba, what would be his plans, and maybe trying to figure, like, finally bring home the destruction of Cuba, which is long sought, which the US is long sought. Do you think that military intervention or anything that is on the table with regard to Cuba? And then also, I was just curious with the pausing and funding of USAID, renewing the contracts with Venezuela. Also, I'm maybe seeing that Rubio has been sidelined a little bit by the Trump administration. So I was just kind of curious what you think about Rubio's role within the White House is, and what you think that kind of portends for Cuba and then other countries in Latin America.
Yeah, Rubio's a recalcitrant Cold Warrior. He's a dedicated anti-communist. The very forces responsible to make sure that the Cubans can't access technology and internet claim to be the ones who want to liberate Cuba. It's the worst type of hypocrisy. How many Cubans, how many children have to go to sleep at night hungry? How many Cubans have had to flee? The main migration route is actually through Nicaragua now because they can get to Nicaragua easy enough because of Cuban Nicaraguan solidarity, cooperation, and then they try to make the trek up to the Mexican border. Cuba is hemorrhaging human lives to migration because of this blockade. It would be another color revolution. It follows a basic blueprint. If they can starve enough people, if they can stoke the flames of dissent, because the special period, that was what they called 1990, 91, when I first went to Cuba in 95. It was called the special period because overnight Cubans' caloric intake was halved from, I think it's 2,800 calories was supposed to have a day, and suddenly they were getting about half of that because the Soviet Union and all their socialist trading partners had imploded and collapsed. So if the forces of imperialism can cause enough despair, if enough Cubans come into the street beating pots and pans, we're hungry, they can't protest Washington, D.C. They can't protest the sellout Cuban Americans in Miami. They can only protest there. So they come into the streets. The authorities have to the authorities, what can they do? This is David versus a Goliath, a genocidal Goliath. And just for saying that word, we've already ruined our algorithms and trying to reach the American people because of all of the censorship. But then they point the finger that Cuba has censorship. What about the censorship right here at home? What they do to the Cubans, to the Nicaraguans, to the Venezuelans, the Zimbabweans, the Chinese, the Vietnamese, the Iranians, they fully encircle these countries. They have an all-out war on Cuba, an all-out war on Venezuela. It's a diplomatic war. It's a military war. It's a paramilitary war. It's an informational media war. It's a diplomatic war. It's first and foremost, it's an economic war. That creates the contradictions from within. The Venezuelans aren't going to relinquish power. They're not going to roll over and say, okay, U.S. imperialism, come take our massive resources. They're going to defend themselves. The Bolivarians, they have sovereignty. So when they defend themselves, then CNN and Fox News, and they always say that the liberals and the conservatives are fighting. But when it comes to applauding Juan Guaido, when it comes to overthrowing Cuba, they're always firmly united in the foreign policy objectives to call out their hypocrisy once again. And at that moment that the Cubans come into the streets and the Cuban state has to defend their interests and their revolution, that's when the forces in Guantanamo, the forces from whatever Fort Bragg and Fort Hood and wherever in the south of the US can then use this to justify whatever invasion of Cuba. It's been floated. They've tried to invade Venezuela. They've used paramilitary forces. They've used intelligence forces. We've seen recently the Venezuelan government has let some of those agents of empire, CIA agents free. You had the Alex Saab prisoner swap as well. But yeah, I predicted in the Gray Zone article that it would be one of Trump's and Marco Rubio's opening salvos. So I would not be surprised if this year they try something that sinister. The new rhetoric is that those three countries are enemies of humanity. Now, Bolivia is not under the same exact pressure, but we should mention Bolivia. Boron, Argentinian sociologist and political scientist, definitely worth studying and translating his work to the English language. And I'm just going to quote him directly because I haven't been in Bolivia recently. I did have the opportunity to meet Evo Morales and some of that leadership in South America before, but these assassination attempts against Evo Morales, it appears that, of course, Evo Morales was the architect of the Bolivian plurinational republic and revolution. He's a Bolivarian, tried and true. And it appears that Lucho Arce has this leftist camouflage, but represents the agenda of the World Bank, of the IMF, of the encroaching imperialist forces. So this divide and conquer mentality is straight out of the CIA playbook. And there's elections coming up in November in Bolivia. Some of us will be traveling down there, but certainly the empire does not want to see Evo Morales, this super committed Bolivarian, win again, because how many different countries have turned their back on Venezuela? Like this fake Chilean president, Boris. First thing he does is attack Cuba and attack Venezuela. He doesn't attack empire, doesn't attack the neo-colonizers. He attacks the countries most in the crosshairs of imperialism. You see that liberal left hypocrisy. So they're trying to use a type of Boris over there with Odyssey, it appears. And we should listen to Bolivian experts. I just submit this based on different things that I've studied, but I don't say it as conclusively as some of the other conclusions that I've drawn. We should remain open-minded and critical. But that's my sense of why things are so divided within the movement towards socialism, the MAS in Bolivia.
Absolutely. Yeah, that was John Bolton called it the troika of tyranny. That's what he called it. Yeah.
My family and Khalil in Miami, one was Nicaraguan, one was Cuban, One was Venezuelan, and there was some Puerto Ricans in the mix, and they formed the Troika Collective
Okay.
based at anti-imperialist Troika Collective based on that quote. So I had to sneak that in there, Giovanni.
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. Like you mentioned the migrant, the sending migrant to Guantanamo, right? Like back, I remember back in '94, I was in the military and they were sending a lot of the Haitian migrants and they were being intercepted and they were taken back to Guantanamo and they would be put in tents there, and also Cubans. They were using Guantanamo Bay for that, for the housing of migrants before as they were coming in. But given the Syrian experience, the recent Syrian experience in Idlib, do you think that that something similar could happen in Cuba, for example, marshaling mercenaries in Guantanamo to unleash them when the time is right, just like what happened in Syria recently?
It's not off the table. They could try to invade from anywhere. I don't think Americans even have a sense of what an incredibly humiliating act to insist upon continuing to have U.S. troops based upon the Platt Amendment back in 1902, occupying Cuba. The glorious Cuban people. 1959 was not just a watershed moment, an inspiring moment for socialism in Cuba, in the Caribbean, in the Americas, but around the world. The Cuban Revolution, not as big as the Chinese Revolution or the Russian Revolution, but how symbolic that the campesinos, the peasants, the poor, the most exploited could stand up and take state power because, of course, capitalism tells us each and every day, you can dream and have noble ideas, but it's pie in the sky. There'll never be socialism. There'll never be egalitarianism. And they want to crush the baby in the womb so that we can't even dare to dream. As Thomas Sankara said, you have to dare to struggle and dare to win. There was an interesting meme back in 1994, back when memes weren't called memes, but they existed in some form or another. And the meme had the Statue of Liberty. And the Statue of Liberty was telling the Cuban immigrants, come so we can showcase you on CNN as immigrants fleeing communism, and then to the Haitian immigrants and the Dominican immigrants and immigrants from the US neo-colonies, of course, the Statue of Liberty said, no, stop right there. We don't want you here. But if the immigrants were from Nicaragua or any other revolutionary country, it was always specifically Cuba. The immigration crisis is not a crisis of the immigrants. It's a crisis of imperialism. It's an inevitable crisis of neoliberalism, of neocolonialism. I don't care how many walls Trump builds. I don't care how many soldiers you put there. When you starve people in Mexico, there was a statistic a few years back, 60% of all Mexicans were surviving on less than $4 a day. It's a little higher now, but you get the general point. Like, now we should talk about Mexico. What Lopez Obrador, what Claudia Sheinbaum have done. Claudia Sheinbaum is continuation, the people-centered projects of Lopez Obrador to break that pre-dictatorship over power. And of course, Lopez Obrador probably wasn't as radical as some of us would like, those who are fidelistas in China. I get it, but hey, we take what we can get. Just the fact that the Mexican leadership has invited the Cuban leadership and the Venezuelan leadership. It was just a few years back that they had a Grupo Lima, this reactionary group based out of Lima, Peru. And then Lopez Obrador came in and set up the Grupo de Puebla, which was an anti-imperialist group. You have the Sao Paulo Forum. So you have all these different expressions of this unity and integration. In Cuba, though it's a small country of only 11 million people, has certainly been at the leadership epicenter of this Bolivarian revolutionary momentum. So the economic sabotage, the military sabotage, the diplomatic sabotage is still there. Lula, we should break down Brazil a little bit. Lula really turned his back, turned his back, stabbed the Bolivarians in the back in Russia a few months back. Final 9 different representatives in the room, and they all voted for Venezuela to be a part of BRICS. Cuba just joined BRICS as well. And that's what article. Cuba's only chance to survive is if the BRICS nations truly go in there and invest. And I really wrote that article for the leadership of the multipolar world. How they don't get how dire things are in La Habana and across Cuba, I'm not sure. What was the final point I was going to make? I lost my train of
You were addressing Lula stabbing, especially Venezuela.
yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
And it was last minute. Brazilians had vowed to vote for Venezuela to come in like the last day. So some jockeying in the background with Lula's ambassadors and the the representatives of the world, or what they want to be unipolar world. They must have somehow got to them or offered them. But Lula does play this kind of fake in between. Like, how do you be in between the predator and the prey? How do you be in between the class enemy and the people? I do this thing every December 31st, the sellout of the year. And last year with the genocide, it was Bernie Sanders and DJ Khaled. And this year it was Lula. How do you turn your back on the country's most under attack from imperialism? Then you talk about you're a diplomat and you're a man of the people. And Lula's story is amazing, coming from these poor families in the Northeast of Brazil into Sao Paulo, became a union leader. So really shameful. Now, that's not to take away from all of Lula's internal enemies in Brazil. He was already couped once, put into jail as a political prisoner. We have to see things dialectically, but this contradiction for Lula will be tough for us to ever forget.
Yeah, I really did want you to finish that point because as Jovanni and I discussed just at the time, I was pretty puzzled by it. And quite frankly, it never works out. It never works out for these sellouts like that. Anyways, do appreciate that. I wasn't familiar with your Despise series until this discussion. So I want to discuss that a little bit because my own background is basically coming from Nebraska, growing up in the 80s during the farm crisis. And basically that was where my formation, right? And my own father basically lost a lumberyard business because of the recession that had hit in the Plain States and across the Midwest, and then saw the takeover of industrial agriculture and then mass immigration influx and basically a real right-wing turn. It's not like it was a super liberal and definitely not a left-wing place to begin with, but it was very much a right-wing turn, anti-immigration and so on. I remember hearing comments from Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz at one point about the farm crisis. There were farmers going to the capitals to protest and to basically make demands on their state governments. They, like Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz and her comrades, had come and intervene and speak with the farm workers or the farmers. And she basically said the KKK and other white supremacists had already beat them to the punch there. So I just wanted to ask, because that upbringing basically led to my participation in the military and so on, to seek college funding and things like that. What kind of lessons does Despise get at in order how we approach, organize, and basically change the narrative, or however you put it, with regard to the situation in rural America and so on?
Yeah, shout out to Omaha, shout out to Nebraska. Malcolm X and grew up in Nebraska, and Malcolm X's father was murdered, a Garveyite murdered the KKK on train tracks in Omaha. Yeah, despised the poor white trash manifesto. Whoop, that really merits its own hour of a conversation. But it's tantalizing. I got to teach in, I think, 4 minutes, or I'd love to.
Okay.
We get together. I think we could talk all night. You making me want to head west, head to the Midwest. I think it'd be very beautiful to do a type of tour with the Poor White Trash Manifesto, because I wrote that because with identity politics, like on paper, right? On paper. And a comrade said to me yesterday, I was going back some stuff that popped off 10 years ago. He's like, I'm gonna tell you the truth. Can I tell you the truth? I said, what else would I want from you but the truth? He's like, I really didn't care what your perspective was. You white. We black. Oh, you white. Whoa, 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 whoa. And I was like, I appreciate you keeping it real. So on paper, right? White, male, that word cis and heterosexual and 6'6". I'm a retired boxer. I got Ivy League degrees. I was a scholarship student and fellowship student. So on paper, shoot, I'm as bad as Elon Musk. I'm worse than Donald Trump, right? According to identity politics. But we don't subscribe to identity politics. We subscribe to Marxist politics. What is Marxism? It's sensuous. It's materialism. When you use your five senses. Now, like on Twitter with all the rumors and BS and the apocalyptic post-reality, post-truth world, when you actually break down what me and my family have gone through in the fatherlessness and the unemployment and the abuse and the generational trauma, everything that we had to survive, I can't tell Jake or Giovanni's entire story, but I'm sure you all have similar stories of how you became politicized and radicalized. Like, we weren't in kindergarten when we learned about anti-imperialism. It wasn't in high school unless you had one of the Howard Zinn type people's history of the US type of teacher. We had to be autodidactic like Malcolm and like George Jackson. We had to be self-taught. So the Poor White Trash Manifesto, despised, is me saying that most poor whites or poor whites, we haven't had a voice either. And Trump how can a billionaire, I read one study that through all these court battles and all the attacks on him, Trump's wealth has multiplied and actually doubled in the past 8 years. So everyone should do their own independent research on that, because different liberal media, conservative media says this or that. But how the heck could Trump and Elon Musk speak for us? And the conclusion of this 50-page manifesto, it's fuck Trump all day, but it's never fuck Nebraska. It's never fuck Ohio. It's never fuck Trump country, which is not Trump country, it's our country. And shout out to the Midwestern Marx Institute, everything that I learned with them, because, me with all my training and with this, I burned many US flags because that's what the people were doing in Port-au-Prince. That's what the Nicaraguan people were doing in Managua. That's what the Dominican people were doing in front of the US Embassy in Santo Domingo, in Caracas, in Venezuela. But I came with a whole new appreciation that the American flag doesn't belong to Jeff Bezos. It doesn't belong to Bill Gates. It doesn't belong to Clinton, Trump, and Tweedledee and Tweedledum and Kamala and Biden. That American flag belongs to the people of Nebraska, the people of the Midwest, who haven't had a voice in the flyover states. And I felt, learning from all my people out there in Carbondale, Southern Illinois, and in Cleveland, Ohio, I felt like I had a Midwest within. So I'll be eternally grateful to the Midwest.
Right on. Thanks for that.
Indeed, I know that you have to depart in a few minutes, and I feel that this conversation has been very rich, and I feel that we could talk for like hours and hours. Before we depart, though, I know Jake mentioned his background. My background is from the Dominican Republic. You write a lot about Haiti, which is the next door neighbor, and Haitian is a very
I gotta teach. It's
okay.
69.
But yeah, I'm gonna cut it real quick, and we don't have to get into it now. In the future, if we ever talk again. But I do appreciate what you write about Haiti, because that's a topic that I I explore, but it's difficult to talk about in my community, my Dominican community, when it comes to Haiti, because of so much despise. That's the word that a lot of people in the Dominican Republic has told Haitians, right? But I appreciate Haiti as being the first Black republic, as being the first true free state of the Americas, giving weapons to Simon Bolivar to free South America, and sending generals to Ethiopia to repel Italian invaders, etc. Haiti has a very rich history, which I like to explore with you in the future. But I know you got to go, Professor Shaw. Again, thank you. Thank you for joining us. I think we can wrap up here. Do you have any last comments before we depart?
Yeah, shout out to all my Dominicans. I'm over here in the South Bronx and in Washington Heights, so I'm in little Santo Domingo. Saludo a mi gente Ernesto de Salin, Dominican. Yeah, at this point, I'm part Dominican too. I've been adopted all them years in struggle. I put out a book, The Saints of Santo Domingo, Dominican Resistance in the Age of Neocolonialism. So been a pleasure building with y'all. I'm a minute late for teaching, but holler at me. Let's get on a Zoom off when we ain't doing all podcasting and everything.
Gotcha.
Hey, what's up to y'all, all y'all comrades, all the veterans out there? I know it's not easy holding it down, being far away from your family station, wherever you are. Keep building with the Jakes and the Giovannis and the Dannys, and we deserve a better world. And only us can usher in that and build and fight for that other world. Ain't no Tweedledee, Tweedledum, Trump, Biden politician can deliver that. That's up to us.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you again, Professor, for joining us, and it's been an honor to have you here. Has been a very rich conversation, and I hope to talk to you soon again. Take care.
Take care, fellas.
Appreciate you.
Peace.
All right, well, thank you for joining us today. Like us, subscribe to our channel on YouTube, X, and Telegram. Let us look us up anywhere where you listen to podcasts. Share it with your friends, and just help us grow. Stay tuned for our next episode, and take care.
Money is tight these days for everyone. Penny pinching to make it through the month often doesn't give people the funds to contribute to a creator they support. So we consider it the highest honor that folks help us fund the podcast in any dollar amount they're able. Patreons is the main place to do that. In addition, any support we receive makes sure we can continue to provide our main episodes free for everyone. And for supporters who can donate $10 a month or more, they will be listed right here as an honorary producer, like these fine folks. Fahim's Everyone Dream, Eric Phillips, Paul Appel, Julie Dupree, Thomas Benson, Janet Hansen, Ren Jacob, and Helgeberg. However, if Patreon isn't your style, you can contribute directly through PayPal at paypal.me/Fortress on a Hill. Or please check out our store on Spreadshirt for some great Fortress merch. We're on Twitter and Facebook.com/Fortress on a Hill. You can find our full collection of episodes at www.fortressonahill.com. Skepticism is one's best armor. Never forget it. We'll see you next time.